If you're highly sensitive, empathic, and working in corporate, this might hurt. You're not just surviving, you're probably making the quiet deal with yourself that you do not even notice anymore. You tell yourself that you're staying for security, the money, the benefits, the safety of knowing what tomorrow looks like. But if you were truly at peace, would you need to keep convincing yourself? Or is there a part of you that is quietly hoping that if you just perform well enough, endure long enough, and achieve enough, then you will finally fit inside the system that was never built for you? When I first entered tech, I genuinely believed the problem was me. I was too sensitive, too aware of tone shifts, too attuned to the subtle political undercurrents in meetings no one named. I could feel when someone didn't like me or didn't want me to be there before they even said a word. And I thought, this is weakness. I need to fix it. No one should see. So I optimized myself. I wrote out exactly what I was going to say before meetings so I wouldn't sound incompetent or inadvertently say what I really thought about all of this. I stayed on every call even when I was mentally gone. I let people blow up my calendar at random times because saying no felt risky. I softened my facial expressions. I trimmed my opinions. I learned how to beat around the bush instead of speaking plainly. I delivered feedback in ways that would not disturb anyone too much. And I became extremely competent at existing in rooms while not being fully present in them. And at night, I would feel this very strange buzzing in my body, as if I had been holding something in all day. So I would take the edge off, a glass of wine, just enough to come down from the performance, because I had been forcing myself into a shape that was never mine. Honestly, it felt like trying to press an iPad into a round pie tin. Yes, you can push harder, you can shave the corners, you can even convince yourself it fits, but the geometry never changes. And here's what I didn't understand at the time. Strengthening or reshaping yourself without ever questioning the container will eventually erode you from the inside. And many sensitive, high empathy, and high performing people stay in this phase for years or even decades. They keep increasing their tolerance, and some even end up needing stimulants just to sustain the pace. And they call it ambition or discipline. But if your body had been bracing all day, that is not ambition. That is a fight you have renamed a career. But not every environment is toxic, and I didn't understand it at first. When I joined PayPal, I was paired with a design lead as my onboarding buddy. And what started as a work partnership very closely became a friendship that extended beyond work. We could talk about anything: work, ambition, culture, doubt, dreams, humanity. She wasn't just guiding me through the company. She was showing me a way of being was possible in a place like that. She was sensitive, empathic, highly perceptive as well. And I remember thinking, what is she doing here? But she wasn't surviving quietly and she was not shrinking. She was steady. She could sit in tense meetings without collapsing into silence. She could speak firmly without aggression and advocate for customers without turning it into opposition. She navigated politics without losing integrity, and she was able to connect with the leadership without performing. She was able to build bridges, not because she was soft, but because she was intentional and precise. I admired her deeply, and that admiration unsettled me at first. Because for many years, I had been quietly believing that there was something wrong with me, that my sensitivity was a liability I needed to fix. Like I needed to harden in order to be able to survive in places like that. Like being myself wasn't even an option. But she was living proof of something else. Not only was it possible to survive in a place like that, it was possible to thrive, to be respected, to lead, to influence, and do all of that through empathy, not ego. Her existence challenged a belief I had built my identity around. And what felt uncomfortable at first wasn't her, it was that belief collapsing. Watching her and being around her, I learned how to ask clean questions instead of ruminating for hours, how to separate tone from intent, how to hold my ground without escalating, how to stay present without bracing, and also how to navigate politics strategically instead of personally. Working with her stretched me in many ways I never knew were possible. But what is interesting, I didn't feel smaller around her. I felt sharper. And that's when I began to understand something that I had not been able to see before. There are three different states that people usually confuse: growth discomfort, political friction, and structural toxicity. Growth discomfort stretches you. Political friction teaches and sharpens you. And structural toxicity erodes you from the inside. If you leave at the very first discomfort, you stay fragile and you lose the opportunity for growth. If you never learn to navigate politics, you stay at its mercy. And if you stay in structural toxicity long enough, you decay. And the skill here is discernment and also courage. There is tension that expands you, and there is tension that diminishes you. One feels activating like adrenaline with purpose, and the other one feels like your chest tightening even before you open your laptop. One makes you feel articulate, inspired, and bold, and the other one makes you shrink your voice. One challenges you into growth, and the other one slowly erodes you from the inside over time. And if you're highly perceptive, you can usually feel that difference long before you can explain it. And that distinction really matters because not every person who challenges you is toxic, and not every uncomfortable environment is wrong for you. But when you start disappearing inside it, when your voice gets quieter and your ambition dulls and your body stays braced, that's information, and I have learned it the hard way. At my first tech job, I was paired with a senior designer who clearly resented my presence. I was new, fresh out of boot camp, imposter syndrome through the roof, and from the very beginning, I felt that passive aggression coming from him. It was subtle, but it was sharp. Like my presence disrupted some internal hierarchy I didn't even know existed. We were on the same team, and our manager had assigned him to help bring me up to speed. Instead, he ignored my questions, refused to collaborate by declining my meeting invites. He would not share the project filed, and he would withhold the prior designs. And then in meetings, he would all of a sudden throw me under the bus, saying, "Let's have Ksenia go first and see what she's got," knowing that I didn't have anything solid to show because he withheld the collaboration that was required to finish the work. And I stayed quiet because I didn't want to seem incompetent. That's the trap when you're perceptive and ambitious. You often protect your image at the cost of your own protection. So that dynamic with the senior designer went on for a while. He didn't like me, but he still used me as a sounding board. I noticed that resentment does not stop people from unloading on you. And then one day, something happened, some updates from the leadership, and 5 or 10 minutes before the meeting that both of us were supposed to go to, he sent me DMs in Slack, very unprofessional comments, openly trashing leadership and stakeholders. I did not respond. We went into the meeting, and that day again, he chose to put me on the spot, saying, "Let's have Ksenia go first." And I remember my mind went blank for a second. I was frantically trying to pull up the right file, trying to sound composed and trying not to panic. And to be honest, the very last thing in that moment was me remembering or thinking of what he has messaged me before the meeting. So when I finally shared my screen, greeted everyone, and began walking through the agenda, I realized that no one was reacting to what I was saying. No movement, just deafening silence, and I could feel it in the air. I instinctively looked down at my screen and I saw the Slack open. That very thread where he had just trashed the very people sitting in this meeting. It happened over 6 years ago, and it still gives me a good laugh, and I still remember his face. He never threw me under the bus again after this. And what this situation taught me wasn't that, karma is real. It was realizing that some toxic people entirely rely on your silence. And the moment you stop absorbing quietly, the dynamic shifts. And that's exactly what happened in my next role. At my next company, I later learned that my direct manager was the only one who didn't want to hire me. She joined my final interview late at the very end, missing the entire context, and then asked me to compress a 1 hour portfolio presentation into 5 minutes. And then based on that, she decided that I was not a good fit. Her manager, the director of product design, overrode her decision, and I received the offer with a strong team support. And yet, from day one, I noticed resistance. And for 3 years, I believed that strong performance would eventually make her change her view of me. I consistently overperformed. I led major initiatives. I received strong peer feedback. I was recognized by leadership, receiving a $10,000 spot award for leading a critical project from 0 to 1. Didn't matter. Around 3 year mark, during the performance review, my manager and I had the same promotion conversation we'd had every year. And that's when she told me something that I will never forget. She said that there are more talented designers who deserve this more. Not more experienced or tenured, more talented. I remember asking her what she meant, if that meant some of the skill gaps I should work on. And she responded that talent is much more important than any skills and performance. But performance can be improved and skills can be sharpened. But talent framed as innate leaves no actionable path forward. Because it is something that is fixed. You're either born with it or not. And if talent outweighs performance, then no amount of work will ever change the outcome. I remember going silent after her words because my body just didn't know what to do with that. I can handle feedback, I can handle areas for growth, and I can handle hearing that I'm not there yet. That's fine. But being directly categorized as fundamentally lesser without actionable path forward, well, that lands differently. That's not critique, that's a ceiling. I noticed that I started to quietly disengage after that. I didn't want to design the same way. I didn't want to collaborate, contribute ideas, or provide feedback. That's what erosion looks like. It is not explosive, it is slow. And I even tried to switch teams, and the internal transfer was moving until it wasn't. After some internal conversations I wasn't part of, the role was no longer available to me. Also, a critical process that required managerial approval and support stalled because the required documentation was not provided in time. My relocation request was denied. To be honest, I don't know what was intentional and what wasn't. but I saw the pattern. And at that moment, I realized that my growth was being blocked. And that's when my well-being started to deteriorate. My sleep changed, my motivation dropped. I constantly felt on edge. I just felt trapped. And that's when I realized something. That system or no one was gonna rescue me, and that whether I decided to stay or leave, the responsibility for my well-being was mine. And here's a crossroads when you're wired like this. You can stay silent and preserve strategic positioning, or you can preserve your dignity. So for a month, I debated. I didn't know what to do, and I was weighing my options. My friends advised me to escalate to HR, to report her, to reach out to her manager, to build a case. And instead, I did something that terrified me more than anything. I confronted her directly. Not for promotion, but for clarity and peace of mind. And I was calm, prepared, and clear. I told her what she said, how it landed, and how I noticed myself to become disengaged afterwards. At first, she deflected. She said that I misunderstood. Then she made it about her being hurt. But I was steady. And eventually she conceded. She apologized, and she said that she will support any future internal transfers if I choose to go that route. And 4 or 5 months later, layoffs happened, and I was impacted. And at first, it felt destabilizing. But if I'm being completely honest, looking back, I could say that I probably had already left internally. And some people could say that it was not very strategic to confront her. Maybe. But 3 months later, a second wave of layoffs happened, and she was impacted. And that's when I realized something. Not everything is within your control. You can try to strategize all you want. You can try to calculate all the outcomes and play it safe. But there are things and processes unfolding that cannot be managed through your positioning alone. And for me, it was so clear that I would much rather live with the consequences of being honest and true to myself than the slow erosion of staying silent. And I'm at peace how things unfolded. I could sleep well. I knew that I did not abandon myself. I could look at myself in the mirror. And I've learned something about myself that mattered more than corporate tenure. I do not tolerate self-betrayal well. And while some people can compartmentalize disrespect and keep climbing or stay in connections or places, I can't. If I stay too long, my body revolts. And that's self-knowledge. And when you feel that revolt in your body, staying quiet stops feeling wise. But the biggest shift wasn't external. It was this. For a long time, I saw my manager as the antagonist in my story. She was not afraid to share what she really thought, even if it was blunt or poorly delivered. And I realized how many times I didn't share what I truly thought. How often I withdrew in silence and called it maturity. How often I created stories in my mind instead of asking one clean question. She provoked something in me that had been suppressed for decades, which is assertiveness and authority. The part of me that says, explain what you mean. Why did you say that? Not aggressively, directly. And that environment forced me to finally practice and start working on something that I had been avoiding my entire life. Speaking before the emotional overwhelm would push me into silence or complete shutdown. And that skill, not the job title, is what I kept. I know some of you may be thinking, Why bother? Just cut them off and move on. I used to think that too, and it can feel much cleaner, stronger, and decisive in the moment. And if the other person or the situation doesn't truly matter, that's fine. But if it does, every connection has two people in it. And when we create a story about someone's intentions and choose to act on it without checking, this is not connection. This is an attempt to control the outcome, protecting ourselves by deciding who someone is before they get a chance to show us. And if we disappear without speaking, we remove the opportunity for clarity and connection. Cutting off is easier than problem solving. Silence feels like power, but courage is riskier. But not every exit is avoidance, though. Sometimes stepping back can be protection. The difference is understanding whether you are living from clarity about a situation or a person or from fear of abandonment. I used to think that silence was maturity, but in reality, it was just my nervous system trying to protect me. Staying present in disagreement without collapsing or withdrawing was the first time I experienced what secure relating actually feels like. But I'll be honest, practicing that at work is easier than in personal relationships. And when you say to someone, "This didn't sit right with me, please explain what you mean," or "This is how your words or actions landed," usually one of two things happens. If the person is not aligned with you, usually they pull back quickly or avoid. And that's good. That's your answer. But if they're capable, then usually they lean in and clarify and are willing to repair. And if that happens, the connection deepens in a way it never could have if you stay silent. That's how you distinguish misalignment from misunderstanding. And it especially matters in the workplace because what goes unnamed usually becomes normal. All right, the rain had other plans, so we're finishing inside. So there is another layer to what I was saying previously. Some of you are not just trapped in toxic environments. You might actually be addicted to proving your worth inside them. Part of you might want that person who doubts you to finally see you and validate you. And if I'm being completely honest, I've had that too. But that desire can keep you in the rooms long past their expiration date. So the shift for me personally wasn't that corporate is evil. It was realizing that I needed to strengthen myself enough in order to be able to navigate that complexity and shape my environment around who I actually am, not the other way around. Sometimes it means staying and building the skills. Sometimes it means making adjustments while you're still in the role or the company. For example, switching to remote if your policy allows, blocking your calendar when your system needs recovery, setting boundaries instead of treating your availability as unlimited, finding a mentor, changing teams internally, asking for a more clear scope instead of silently absorbing chaos. To be honest, not everything requires a dramatic exit. Sometimes survival begins with structural changes. And sometimes it means documenting patterns quietly, naming something once, and watching what happens next. Not to build a case, but to see reality clearly. And if the environment responds, you grow. And if it doesn't, that's data. And sometimes, yes, it means living. Finding a different container, whether it's another company, a team, a leader, or a structure that is more closely aligned with your values and your vision and doesn't keep your nervous system constantly braced. Sometimes it means contracting and just working flexibly on your own terms. And sometimes it actually means to finally start building something of your own. That business idea that you keep postponing, the project you keep minimizing, the book, the podcast, the channel, the thing that feels risky because it's actually yours. Survival, when you're wired to feel deeply, is not about becoming less sensitive or less perceptive. It's about knowing when discomfort is shaping you, when it's shrinking you, and when it's completely tearing you apart, and having the courage to respond accordingly. And that type of courage is not dramatic in the moment. It is quiet and it ages well. One day you will look back at this period of your life and you will measure it by your title, your salary, or how long you lasted. You will measure it by one thing. Did you abandon yourself to stay, or did you stay intact, even if it costs you your position, peace, and security? Because here's the truth. You can survive almost any system, but you can't survive the long-term betrayal because your body keeps score, your sleep keeps score, your creativity keeps score. So the quiet ways you shrink, they compound. So if you're still in it, stay awake. And if you leave, leave clean. Just don't negotiate the pieces of yourself in exchange for proximity, because these trades accrue interest.